Hello and a very warm welcome to my talk on hurricanes, Atlantic travel and global justice in King Lear. My name is Kirsten Sandrock and I would like to start by thanking the organizers of the Globe for Globe conference on making this global conference on Shakespeare and environmental justice happen. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to mention that most of the research which I present here today is based on an article I published earlier this year in Studies in English Literature, in an article called Hurricanes, Atlantic Weather and Global Time in King Lear. And in that article, you find more evidence and more analysis also of the links between hurricanes, Atlantic weather and King Lear. For my talk today, I would like to develop my thoughts on global time into a direction of global justice and argue that an interpretation, a reading of King Lear as being concerned with questions of justice, order, and disorder is also always linked to global environments and questions of global justice. And I do that by looking at the storm scenes in King Lear. And many of you will be familiar with the most iconic scenes in which King Lear encounters a hurricane. Now, we all know that hurricanes hardly ever happen near Dover, but the term is used in both the quarto from 1608 and the folio from 1623. And the storm speech by King Lear opens with the words, "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanos. Spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks." Numerous critics have read these and other parts of the storm speeches as a sign of the breakdown of the natural order in Lear's world, as a reflection that the universe, so to speak, has been thrown out of balance, and that also that Lear is punished for his abdication, for the division of the land, for the cruelty towards his daughters, and so on. In the age of the Anthropocene and with the rise of eco-criticism, numerous critics have argued that there's also a different way of reading the storm, namely not only as a reflection of human sentiments, but also as an event, as an environmental event in its own right. And here are some of the sources on which I base my own reading, actually, of the storm as part of a contemporary meteorology and also of an encounter with actual environments. What I would like to add to these and other studies is that Lear not only references the local, the British environments of his time, but that he also references global environments and encounter with global environments. And to do so, I would like to look a bit into the etymology of the term hurricane and then link it back to travel narratives of the time. The term hurricane is usually, quote, a name given primarily to the violent windstorms of the West Indies, and it entered into the English language via letters and reports from European travelers towards the Caribbean and the Americas in the mid-16th century. Steve Menz has explored the history of the term and shown that Spanish travelers derived the word actually from the Taino word huracan, which was then translated into the Spanish and Portuguese furacán or furicano, which was then actually turned into the English hurricane or hurricano. Two of the first works in English that used the term hurricane were Richard Eden's translation of Pietro Martire's Decades of the New World from 1555 and Richard Hakluyt's Principal Navigations from 1589. And numerous other studies have shown links between Shakespeare's works and these and other travel narratives. I don't argue that Shakespeare necessarily read them, but I do argue that he knew about travel narratives towards the Atlantic, towards new global environments. And I'd like to quote a longer passage from Decades of the New World in order to show how Atlantic weather, Atlantic environments provide an additional framework to think about questions of environments, environmental justice, but also global justice in King Lear. And the passage is from the first decade of Richard Eden's Decades of the New World. And it describes how a Spanish admiral and his crew arrive at one of the Caribbean islands, and how they hear from the local inhabitants about a storm that raises the question of a divine order and also divine justice. And I quote a longer passage here. The same year, in the month of June, they say, there rose such a boisterous tempest of wind from the southeast as hath not lightly been heard of. The violence hereof was such that it plucked up by the roots whatsoever great trees were within the reach of the force thereof. When this whirlwind came to the haven of the city, it beat down to the bottom of the sea 3 ships which lay at anchor, and broke the cables in sunder. The people, therefore, muttered among themselves that our nation had troubled the elements and caused such portentous signs. These tempests of the air, which the Grecians call typhoons, that is, whirlwinds, they call furakanes, which they say do oftentimes chance in this island, but that neither they nor their great-grandfathers ever saw such violent and furious furakanes that plucked up great trees by the roots, neither yet such surges and vehement motions of the sea that so wasted the land. The passage fuses Greek weather vocabulary, what the Grecians call typhoons, with newly encountered Atlantic weather phenomena. It renders, in Stephen Greenblatt's sense of the term, the unfamiliar familiar by using epistemologies that Europeans were familiar with. It also links the question of the hurricane to global justice or divine justice, understandings of divine justice, which is similar to what Shakespeare does in King Lear. Shakespeare seems to invoke the hurricane not coincidentally in King Lear. Lear's local environments are linked to more global dimensions of oceanic environments, which are then linked to questions of global justice, also questions of cosmic punishment. The indigenous populations of the island wonder whether our nation, so the European travelers, had troubled the elements and caused such portentous signs. In the same way, readers of King Lear, audiences, viewers of King Lear, are made to wonder whether King Lear himself may have caused the metaphysical struggle with the elements. The passage also references shipwrecks and the effects that the storm, the hurricane, actually has on the ship. And I would like to quote Steve Men's Shipwreck Modernity here, where Men's argues that, quote, ancient stories about human encounters with divine wrath would become increasingly topical representations of the fates of men, goods, and voyages by sea. So travelers to the Atlantic frequently interpreted storms and shipwrecks in relation to divine wrath and question of divine justice, just as the indigenous populations also did in the quote we just saw. Needless to say, Lear himself is neither a sailor nor a traveler. However, he encounters a hurricane in a similar way that positions him at the center of a justice system that he himself has set up in the opening of the play, where he institutes the love test as an alternative system, a legal system actually, to either punish or reward his daughters. Lear also acts as a whirlwind from Act 1 onwards. In my article, I argue that, quote, Lear not only encounters a Caribbean storm, but also himself personifies the hurricane, the force he thinks he is resisting. From the opening onwards, actually, Lear is linked to questions of divine fury, divine frenzy that is set up in the play's wrestling, actually, with the legal system. He's linked to the Greek god Typhoon in the opening when Lear says to Kent, "Come not between the dragon and his wrath." And the Greek god Typhoon is not only said to be responsible for typhoons, he is also represented as a reptilian giant breathing fire. Lear's fury then commences as a cyclical movement. He wraps everybody into the circular movement of the hurricane and leads everyone actually to become part of the fury and the frenzy of that movement. Shakespeare must have been attracted to the dramatic possibilities of the term furicano when he links his own protagonist, who is defined by moments of fury and frenzy and wrath, to a global weather phenomenon that is also linked to the same motions. By way of concluding this article then, this presentation then, I would like to suggest that an interpretation of King Lear in relation to global environments also brings up questions of global justice. Who holds power over the global environments? Do hurricanes in the Caribbean arise because European travelers disturb the local spaces? Are global environments increasingly encroaching upon British spaces, as Lear's encounter with a hurricane near Dover seems to suggest? In the end, the fool is the only one who escapes such questions, who escapes the certainty of epistemologies by moving easily within the fluidity of the water environments. He references marine ecology such as the crab, the oyster, and later on also the naughty night to swim in. As for Lear, however, his encounter with a global storm asks questions not only about local and global environments, but also about local and global systems of justice in the early modern period. Thank you very much. You can see my sources here, and I look forward to the Q&A and to seeing many of you as part of the conference on Saturday. Thank you.